Sox, White Sox, go, go, White Sox. Let's go, 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 White Sox. We're with you all the way. You're always in there fighting and you do your best. We're glad to have you out here in the Middle West. We're gonna root, White Sox and cheer you on to victory. When we're in the stands, we'll make those rafters ring.
This episode of A Conversation with John Conenna is sponsored by Generate. In today's digital age, staying ahead means harnessing the power of generative AI. Wondering how your small or medium-sized business can join this revolution? Look no further than Generate, your strategic partner for integrating cutting-edge generative AI solutions. We create personalized plans, adapting existing AI technologies to fit your specific business needs. Plus, our expert team provides essential training, empowering you to make the most of these innovative technologies. Interested in transforming your business with AI? Reach out to us at generateteam@gmail.com. That's generate, GENERAIT, team@gmail.com. And now, on with the episode.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Conenna. Tonight, it brings me a great pleasure to bring in author, sports historian for baseball and football. We're going to talk about one of his books. He's written three of them that I know of. One of them is the 1963 Chicago Bears, George Halas, and the Road to the NFL Championship. And then the other book was Wrigley Field's Last World Series. And of course, tonight, we're going to talk about Comiskey Park's Last World Series, a history of the 1959 Chicago White Sox. And my guest tonight is author, like I said, sports historian, Charles Billington. And this is the book this evening here that we are going to talk about and touch base on that season. A lot went on in that season. So Charles, to bring you in, thank you for coming on, and what is going on with you, young man?
Well, thank you very much for having me, John. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my experiences writing this second book on the 59 White Sox and trying to get people who remember that team to reminisce about what, for many baby boomers, was their most favorite team in Chicago, and for Sox fans who came later, to introduce them and get them more familiar with probably the most exciting team in White Sox history, the 59 White Sox.
Right, without a doubt. I have to ask you, were you born and raised in Chicago?
Yes, I was. I lived in Lincolnwood until I was 14. I went to North Park Academy in Chicago, which has now become a university. And I also was lucky enough, obviously, to grow up in an area which eventually became the only big city with two Major League Baseball teams, one in each league. After 58, when the Giants moved out to San Francisco, Chicago still had two teams, and we were divided. Our group loyalties were partly with the White Sox, maybe a little more with the Cubs. I talk about in the preface to the book, it kind of depended upon who your father rooted for or what neighborhood you hailed from. You know?
Right, exactly. I have to tell you, though, the White Sox, of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, were they Chicago's team for a while there? I mean, were they Chicago's team up until that, when they make that 59 run? It was unbelievable.
The Cubs had a dismal run from 1948 to 1951, culminating in the trade of their only bona fide local hero, Andy Pafko. 1 month after Andy Pafko left, Pafko, by the way, here's a statistic for all you Adam Dunn fans out there. Last player in the National League to hit over 30 home runs and strike out less than 30 times.
Wow.
Strike out fewer times than he homered. Imagine if he had 35 home runs in 50 and he struck out only 31 times. Imagine if somebody did that today.
Sure.
Imagine, now on the South Side, just to go off the subject for 1 second, Ted Kluszewski did that 3 years in a row when he was with the Redlegs. But as they were called back then, they changed their name from the Reds because of the Cold War, believe it or not, in the 50s. But our group, our little band of brothers in Lincolnwood, we were evenly divided, I think, between
Mhm.
the White Sox and the Cubs. And once we learned how to read the Tribune, we Cub fans like to turn it upside down just to see what it'd feel like to have the Cubs on the
Yeah.
top and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia in second and third place instead of the other way around.
That was cool. I read that
Yeah.
about it when there's something. Oh, so you're a graduate of St. Olaf College, and you wind
Yeah.
up getting a master's degree at the University of Chicago, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What I've always been intrigued because it's something that I would love to do, but I don't think it's ever going to happen in my lifetime. But is this the first? No, what makes you write books? And especially three great books here. This 59 book, and of course the 63 Bears and the Wrigley Field book. What
Mhm.
do you get up one morning and say, I got a passion to do this before we get into the cusp of the 59 thing?
Well, I think that it has to do with the fact that nowadays, in this era of electronic media and instant news and so many different sources of information, valid and invalid, and yet back when I was a kid, back when these events were happening, the 63 football season, the 59 baseball season, all you had was the sports pages in three newspapers. Now, I wish we had three, four newspapers today like we did
Right.
then. But what was covered by the sports writers was the very, very tip of the iceberg. And it seemed almost like every single sports writer in those days was nothing more than a house organ for the team. None of the backstories were talked about. None of the dissension was talked about. None of the human conflict involved in these players' lives, which made their lives really important. Now, the newspapers every now and then would pick up something from the um, uh, rap sheets or from the police reports. There was the Tribune did, and perhaps there was a racial tinge to this, but they did cover Minnie Minoso's lack of child support payments that were in court.
So
All
that did come up at one time in that era.
right, but I mean, by and large, we knew nothing about the team other than maybe it needed pitching, or maybe in the hot stove league we'd be looking for a relief pitcher, or maybe people would debate the big trade, the almost Kierkegaardian trade between the Tigers and the Indians when the Tigers gave up Harvey Keene, the batting champ, for Rocky Colavito, a home run champ, things like that. But it never got into the weeds in terms of the human element of a lot of the players. And the more I thought about that, and I had some lucky breaks through some of the work I did, I ran into a gentleman who played shortstop with Phil Cavaretta not on the Cubs, but on Phil Cavaretta's high school American Legion team, which won the National American Legion tournament. And then
Okay.
by complete luck, through some of my work with hospitals and with the elderly, I ran into a gentleman who was the oldest living, as he told me, and I didn't believe him until I checked it out myself, the oldest living teammate of Lou Gehrig. And he was. And he never played for the Yankees. He played for Columbia University. He was a outfielder, and Gehrig went to Columbia for 3 semesters and played baseball there.
Yes.
And his fraternity, this guy was 100 years old. His fraternity was the place where Gehrig's mother was the cook. So he had a lot of meals with Lou Gehrig, everything else. Fascinating stories. Then, of course, you want to check, well, this he's 98 years old. How much of this is he making up? How much does he remember accurately? Awful lot of it was accurate with my
Sure.
checking and so forth. And one thing led to another. And I started writing books about this, knowing that there's never really been a critical inside look of any of these teams back in those days. You know what I'm
No,
saying? Yeah.
no.
So that's how it all came about.
And and I have to tell you, great point by you tonight to start this. Like, all the things now that have come out about a Mickey Mantle with if he was with
Mhm.
so and so and so and so and so. But during that time, we really didn't know that Mantle was this carouser, correct, with Whitey Ford and
Not at
Billy
all.
Martin.
Right.
Exactly.
Didn't know that he was a carouser. Didn't know, and nobody knew anything close to how much drinking he was doing and so forth until he needed a liver transplant. And then he said, well, if I had known, ruefully said, if I had known I'd live this long, I would have taken better care of myself.
Sure.
How's that for a deja vu?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Great way to start this tonight by you because, yeah, you talk about, and again, I would like to know this as the first question. I think the first chapter is in the book is "See You in Court." So when we
Right.
talk, yeah, when we see in the book of Comiskey Park's last World Series, and you had sent me something to set up this interview, which I really appreciate because I
Right.
had not gotten the book and kind of leafed through it. And it was basically the plaintiff defensive notes that you sent out to me, and there was the feud going on with Charles Comiskey and Bill Veeck. And again, to
It's a
answer
tremendous
this,
feud.
this starts in
Yeah.
1957,
Yeah,
basically.
it actually starts when a mother dies.
Right.
And when the mother dies, Lewis's widow, when Lewis died, he left about 3,700 shares of the team for the family. All of it went to his wife, who died in 1956. She had her ins and outs with her only son, Chuck Comiskey. And he is the Comiskey that we see the statue of in the outfield at White Sox Park, Chuck
Yes.
Comiskey. His sister, Dorothy, was a bookkeeper of the team, kind of the accountant of the team. She had gone to Northwestern and started working with the team as soon as she finished. Chuck got out of the College of St. Thomas, which is now St. Thomas University, in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was sent there to their prep school after 1 year at De La Salle. I've unfortunately was not able to figure out exactly what happened at De La Salle. He only lasted there a year, but he went up. He was sent away, as they say, to a prep school in St. Paul, almost a Fitzgerald story. When he came out in 1948, White Sox were in such bad shape that they had trouble making their spring training payroll. That's what kind
Wow.
of a mess the team was. And he came in to work, and they also hired a very irascible, opinionated, but very brilliant and very energetic guy named Frank Lane
Greater
to
Lane.
rearrange the team. Frank Trader Lane, to rearrange the team. First thing they did was they put the entire team on waivers, and only one player was claimed, Aaron Robinson, a catcher. Only one player was claimed. After that, they said, well, we got a lot of work to do. We'll start with some pitching. They talked to Detroit about getting a pitcher. Detroit didn't want to give up who they wanted. They said, you're not going to give that guy up, but we'll give you a guy named Pierce, a left-hander named Billy Pierce. They said, well, what do we know about Pierce? He said, well, he's been with the team. We called him up for the 45 World Series. He didn't play at all in the 45 World Series, but he's got some promise. Well, Pierce not only had some promise, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. He's
Hall of
probably the
Fame. We'll
greatest
get to
lefty.
that too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Probably the greatest lefty the White Sox have ever had. Then, after that, they talked to Connie Mack, who was always selling players because he couldn't make any money. Interesting backstory about Connie Mack and the Depression. Back in the early years of the Depression, there was no FDIC. So you had your money in the bank. If the bank had trouble or it went up for grabs, or if it went belly up like the ones in Bridgeport lately have been doing, you're out. You're out of luck.
There was no federally
Mack-
insured bank. Right. There was no, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Mack he was worth $80,000 in 1932, which is a tremendous amount of money. To be a fair guy, he put $20,000 in the four major banks of Philadelphia. Three of them went belly up, and of course they weren't insured. He lost 3/4 of his fortune. After that, the Athletics never won, which was a powerful team up until the early 30s. They never won another pennant. He was always selling players off.
Sure.
Well, he had this little 160-pound guy, who was as tough as nails, but he was 160 pounds, and he had an attitude, named Nellie Fox.
Nellie
He gave
Fox.
up on Fox, traded Fox to the White Sox. Suddenly, the Sox have Pierce and they have Fox, and then they went to town in the Latin
Yes.
park, the Latin market as well, getting guys, pitchers, getting other people, getting Chico Carrasquel, was a world-class shortstop at the time, filling in the team slowly but surely, and then getting a cast-off Yankee catcher who was with the Browns, who, believe it or not, used to play baseball with Mickey Mantle's dad, a guy named Sherman Lawler.
Lawler.
Lawler was from Oklahoma. the Yankees said, well, Lawler's got a lot of talent and he's pretty good behind the plate and he can hit, but we like this guy Berra more. That was in 1947. So Lawler bounced around from team to team. They got Lawler from the Browns. Lawler, if you take Yogi Berra out of the equation, is probably the most effective catcher of the 1950s. He could hit. He could hit for power. He had a good arm. He was a great handler of pitchers. As you can
Yes.
tell, the White Sox strength all through this era was pitching. And suddenly, when you throw that together, and then you have a guy named Jim Busby, who was a human go-kart in center field, the White Sox have a core. They've got a shortstop. They've
Is
got
it
pitching.
not just to ask you this, Charles,
Yeah.
was that Jimmy Landis?
Landis, they got rid of Busby because
Busby, okay.
Landis was ready. Landis was an amateur that they found in California, and Landis was a great fielder, probably better than Busby, almost
Wow.
as fast as Busby, but he wasn't a hitter. He developed his hitting later on.
Sure.
So they had this core up the middle, and they had this great pitching, and that's exactly what you need in that dead ball ballpark, because it's not like these other teams with all the thumpers. Back then, the Indians had Al Rosen and Luke Easter. The Yankees had Mantle, and the Yankees had Berra, and they had Bauer,
Yeah.
and all these teams with power,
Power.
but that wasn't going to win it in White Sox Park. Speed, pitching, and fielding was going to do
And
it.
defense. Yeah. Let's go to 59 for a second. I appreciate
Sure, absolutely.
I appreciate you bringing up, of course, the feud that went on with Vec, and of course the Comiskies and Charlie Finley's in this feud. So
Yeah.
again, people don't realize how you brought this up tonight beautifully. What was behind the scenes? Like you said, you picked up the paper. You didn't read this like today. We read more of the negative than we do of the positive in our life. Right. I have to ask you, I'm going to ask you the question. Were you a White Sox fan from the get-go?
I was born into, I'll put it this way, I was born into a Cubs family, all right? But I was kind of enraptured with the success of the 59 White Sox. And in the years previous to that, when they'd come so close to catching the Yankees, what invariably would happen is they'd be a game out, or they'd be a game in first place. There'd be a big 4-game series against the Yankees in July or August, a Friday night game, a Saturday afternoon game, then a doubleheader. And Chicago's hearts would be broken because they'd lose the doubleheader, or they'd lose in 10 innings on Saturday and then split the doubleheader. And the Yankees would always overcome them. 59, it culminated in success finally.
Right. And another great point by you, because I don't know what the season was. You'll probably remember, but there were 10 games left in the season. And the line by the great Al Lopez, the manager, says, there were 10 games left. We were a game out. The Yankees went 10-0. We went 9-1, and lose that Bennett. Right. Let's talk about, again, this great book, The Comiskey Park's Last World Series, A History of the 1959 White Sox, from Mr. Billington. This is a book that everyone should get. I have to, and I love the cover with the one and only Luis Aparicio, the shortstop, sliding in there.
Tagging out Pumpsy Green, the man that integrated the Boston Red Sox.
Yes, the Boston Red Sox. Pumpsy Green is trying to put the tag on the speedster. I have to.
And how fitting a name was, and how fitting was their manager in that segregated era of Boston, Pinky Higgins. Can you beat that?
Jeez, good stuff here. At the start of the 59 season, does a Charles Billington think at that time that the Chicago White Sox are going to have a World Series in Comiskey Park?
No, I don't think so. To my 10-year-old mind at the time, it was just another team. It was another White Sox team. Maybe we'll do well. Maybe we won't. We'll have to see. I certainly didn't have any predictions or hope that things were going to go that way at that age in 5th grade. No.
Right, exactly. There had to be a lot of turning points with that team, meaning trade. There was so much talent, Charles, of course, that you brought out in the book, and especially that last chapter. I think the last chapter in the book is the sadness of the fleeting success, because now we start getting away people. I mean, I even remember people like, and again, it's before my time, but players that I enjoyed, Norm Cash and Johnny Callison, who Norm Cash went to Detroit, and Johnny Callison, of course, became a star with the Philadelphia Phillies, were on that 1959 team for cups
And
of
so was
coffee or
John,
whatever.
and so was John Romano, and so
John
was
Romano,
Earl Batty. Earl Batty is borderline Hall of Fame catcher for the
sure,
Minnesota Twins. John Romano, he had a succession of all-star appearances as well. I mean, the minor league system, Chuck Comiskey and Frank Lane had just stocked it. They had a great cadre of players in the
wow,
minor leagues that they brought up. They sent Callison down during the season because he was a young guy. He was a matinee idol. There's a picture of him in the book. He looks a little bit like Frankie Avalon his first year in the major leagues. Every Bobby Soxer in Sox Park was after him, but he simply couldn't hit that first year. There was a lot of pressure on him. He couldn't
sure,
do it. Then they called up Jim McEnany, who, until he started having health problems 2 or 3 years later, was a fantastic hitter. So McEnany and Jungle Jim Rivera
right?
played right field, next to Landis in center, and then with Al Smith in left. That was a pretty effective outfield when you think
Outfield,
about it in terms of glove men. And then, of course, you had Bubba Phillips at third or Billy Goodman.
Billy
And then
Goodman,
you Aparicio, Fox, first Earl Torgeson, and then
Torgerson.
on Ted Kluszewski. How did they get Ted Kluszewski? They traded Harry Suitcase Simpson, probably the most misunderstood player in American League history. Harry Simpson was almost Larry Doby. He was almost brought up in 47 by the Indians to integrate the
Wow,
American League. That's how good he was. And he played a minor role for the 59 White Sox before he was traded to Pittsburgh for Kluszewski. But that minor role included, I believe, 5 or 6 game-winning hits. That's how effective he was
he
as a
was.
pinch hitter, including a grand slam home run against the Yankees.
Of course, Kluszewski helps them in that second half of the season. Of course, has that
Yeah.
game one with those 2 home runs. I
Yeah.
can still see the sleeves. He would
Yeah. One of the greatest games by a Chicago hitter in World Series, in Chicago World Series
but
history. He
probably
was
at
a
that
local
time,
guy.
we get him from
Plus, he was a local
Pittsburgh,
guy. Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. He
And
was
probably
from
at that
Argo.
time they thought Kluszewski was probably done Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, he was. And he had also, he was involved in a fight on the field the year before, and he had kind of hurt his back, and it affected his hitting somewhat. But he was ready to come back to Chicago, and such a big deal was made about him. They put a sign underneath Shields Avenue, and it said Big Clue Drive. Mayor Daley did that. For a
Wow.
while, Shields Avenue was called Big Clue Drive, simply because of his efforts during the World Series.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Did he, Charles, did Kluszewski, did he pay dividends when he came over in that midseason trade?
He hit very well, but he didn't hit too many homers. He didn't
Okay,
hit a lot of home runs when he first came over, but he hit well. And he was a very steadying influence. He was a he was the only guy to score a touchdown in the Rose Bowl for the University of Indiana, and the only Rose Bowl that I think they won back in the 40s. He was a tremendous athlete, came from Argo High School in Chicago, local guy. And so, I mean, it couldn't have been a more natural story for him to succeed.
to come
And
back
of
here.
course, he was at the tail end of his career at the time, but what a story.
I have to ask you, and again, like I said, the book is fantastic. I can't really wait to indulge into it because I mean, like, there's a chapter in there. I think it's chapter 7 called "The South Side Rises," and of course, the
Yeah, that's right.
chapter 8
That's
is
an entire chapter what that chapter does is it deals with how the coming World Series, what kind of an effect it had on Bridgeport and on
right,
the near south side neighborhood of Chicago, because it was really the last neighborhood team. The Dodgers had moved out of Brooklyn. Once the Dodgers moved out of Brooklyn, the only real, quote, neighborhood, unquote, team in baseball were the Sox. And the
right.
Sox, they had a neighborhood football team too at the same time, the Cardinals. And
The
the Cardinals
Cardinals,
in Comiskey Park was 1959. I
and
write about that in the book. There's a $50,000 hole in the White Sox budget because the Cardinals decided to play at Soldier Field. They couldn't draw flies at Sox Park anymore because they were just. That's a long story, which I get
well,
into.
was the attendance worse than this past year?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, it was. Okay, well now,
Cardinals, yeah. Well, for the Cardinals, yeah. The Cardinals, the football Cardinals had a difficult time making the $20,000 payment to the visiting team, which was what was the guarantee was in those
okay,
days when a visiting team came in. So there was pressure on the NFL by the NFL for the Cardinals to move out of Comiskey Park as well. But you see, that was a kind of a hole in their $3 million budget. I was lucky enough to get a balance sheet. You know, baseball's very tight with the balance sheets. They don't give them out.
You don't give them
But I
up.
found the balance sheet. I got it through probate court in Chicago in the settlement of the Comiskey estate.
Oh, wow.
So
You
yeah,
did
because there
your
was one of
homework.
the
You did your homework. Yeah.
well, you see the son and daughter were fighting over control of the team. So of course, what the court wants to know what exactly the assets are and what the value of the team is. And so there it is. I think it's on page 7. On page 14 is the balance sheet for the team.
The balance sheet. I'll have to go back and look at that. I
Yeah.
have to tell you, great tie-in to the Brooklyn Dodgers. Of course,
Yeah.
the Flatbush team there in Brooklyn. Because
Right.
after 1957 there in Brooklyn, you talk about, of course, this was a neighborhood of my people in Brooklyn, Italian
Sure.
people, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden,
Yeah.
yeah, 1958, you go there and there is no more Brooklyn Dodgers. So yeah, this was a great thing by you, the club's historical importance to Chicago, because this is Daly's
Yeah.
team. This is Daly's team. He's
Exactly.
from Bridgeport, and what a beautiful tie-in you had. As that season marches on and they make the moves and everything, there is some issues. And the one that I want to bring up is the gentleman you brought up. I don't remember this, but because I wasn't part of the 1959 around here in 59. Am I correct to say that Billy Pierce does not get into the World Series?
He got in. He got in just for a few innings, though. Of course, in the book, have the exact number and so forth. Off the top of my head, I can't remember,
Yeah.
but there's a couple of reasons for that. Pierce pitched, and by the way, Billy Pierce was one of the most generous with his time, one of the kindest guys I ever ran into. He was a big help in putting this book together.
Wow.
And a very sad story. He and I were going to give a book presentation in his hometown of Lamont at the Lamont Public Library, and he passed away the week before we were going to do that, so I had to do it by myself. He was a wonderful guy, and he told me that he had difficulty with Lopez over the fact that he didn't get into the World Series hardly at all. He relieved and did well relieving in one of the games in Los Angeles. Lopez's excuse was as follows. If it's an excuse, Lopez, for the most part, was a pretty honorable guy, so I don't think this is a cop-out. But Pierce, as I put in the book, pitched a 16-inning game against Baltimore. 16 innings.
16
A
innings.
night game against Baltimore. And he strained one of his legs. He wasn't the same after that, and that was in mid-August. But he was ready for the World Series. However, you had Early Wynn. You had Dick Donovan, who could confound batters and was an intimidating presence on the mound. You had Bob Shaw, a young guy with great stuff.
Kirk Lawn.
As a fifth starter, you had Barry Latman, and the games were 2 in Chicago, 3 in LA, 2 in Chicago. So Shaw was 18-1, 18-2. Lopez goes Wynn, best pitcher in baseball that year. Shaw, day off. Los Angeles. Whoa, 250-foot left field fence. 250 feet. That's smaller than Little League. IHSA high school minimum is 310.
That was at the Los
High
Angeles.
school.
That was at the Los Angeles Coliseum.
It's in the Coliseum. Yeah, they have this Great Wall of China, as they
Right.
called it, not to be politically correct, because it was a big cyclone fence. But he's thinking to himself, well, Pierce isn't pitching like he was before, and he's a lefty, and they've got this right-handed stocked lineup, and the fence is 250 feet away. I don't trust him. I don't trust that he can dominate in that kind of a setting. So he didn't start. He didn't start Pierce in any of those 3 games in Los Angeles. The Sox won the first game, as everyone knows. Then they won the 4th game. They won the 5th game in Los Angeles. I think it was 2-0, 1-0.
Rivera made the great catch in right field.
Yeah, the Jungle Jim made a great catch to save the game. Day off, coming to Chicago. The last thing Los Angeles Dodgers wanted to do was come to Chicago. They didn't want 47-degree early October weather. They didn't want the smog and the cloudiness. They didn't want that lousy big, ballpark. and that they couldn't hit in instead of having a 250-foot fence. They wanted to get the whole thing over with, but they couldn't. Lopez tells the press, well, I'm going to either go with Wynn or I'm going to go with Pierce, or maybe I'll go with Pierce and then I'll go with Wynn. He made a fatal error. He decided to go
Win-win.
Wynn, Pierce. Wynn was over 40 years old at the time. He
Sure.
was worn out, long season. They pretty much hit him like a piñata. And
Oh
then they
yeah.
put in Dick Donovan. Donovan had some tough luck on the mound. Before the game was anywhere close to being over, it was out of reach, and it was kind of a sad story. And when I talked to Pierce about that, he just said, it bothered him a lot. But then, in 1962, Vec had disbanded the team and he was with the Giants.
Right.
He pitched some masterful games in the World Series against the Yankees, which they lost when I think it was Gil McDougall made a fantastic catch on a Orlando Cepeda line drive. Otherwise, that San Francisco team would have won the World Series. And Pierce, as usual, outpitched Whitey Ford in that World Series. Pierce belongs in the Hall of Fame. It's this terrible, terrible shame that he's not there.
Without a doubt, he's
Yeah.
got over 200 wins
Yeah,
in his
exactly.
career. So no, well, I'm with you all the way. That's another
Yeah.
one that's been missed. But I have to tell you, so I did not, Charles, know about the 16 inning game during the 59 season. Now,
Yeah.
did the media, again, beautifully again tonight, how you brought this up, did the media know here in Chicago that Billy Pierce had the strained calf?
No,
They did not know.
no. There was talk. There was, he was bumped and bruised. They said after the game, but there was no big deal about it made and everything else. You have to also understand in those days, pitchers were paid to pitch and they pitched. I don't know how many pitchers that year pitched over 200 innings. Now, if somebody pitches over 200 innings, they name a snack bar after them. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Or
And
your agent suing the other guy. Yeah, I know.
exactly,
Exactly.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
have to ask you a question that maybe Charles Billington. I want to stop here just for a second to
sure.
remind our audience that we are visiting tonight with one of the greatest authors who has written 3 books here in Chicago. Tonight we are visiting with Charles and Billington, Comiskey Park's last World Series. And of course, this is about a history of the 1959 Chicago White Sox. I am definitely going to have to get Charles back on for a part 2 because this conversation is really going the way I thought it would. I have to ask
Good.
you, and I know somebody like you, a historian like you, did Al Lopez really truly love Nellie Fox or didn't like him, just like this Pierce story?
There was a lot of issues between. I have learned that I was not able to put in the book. The publisher kind of thought it might be a little controversial, and it's what
Sure.
some people say instead of documented. Neither of them are alive, of course, to guarantee that. You have to understand the background of the individuals. Fox was from a coal mining area in Pennsylvania. He, I believe, finished 8th grade, but I'm not sure. I know he finished 7th grade. Then he became involved in baseball, chased baseball in an almost Don Quixotean way. Nobody really wanted him. They thought he was too small. He got bounced around in the low minors by the County Mac, proved himself, became one of the greatest. There's only one player with less of a strikeout percentage than Nellie Fox, and that's Lloyd Weiner. So this guy struck out, I think, 2.7% of the time that he batted. He was an amazing contact hitter, an amazing number 2 hitter, but he was a very, very difficult competitor. He didn't like to lose. He also had an issue with Lopez in terms of, to put it as delicately I can, whose team it was.
Mhm.
He's been on the White Sox since they were almost bankrupt. He's been on the team since 1948. He was one of the first ones that Lane and Comiskey put on the team. And here Lopez is telling him to calm down after another victory by Larry Sherry. He had a lot of ugly things to say about Larry Sherry, dealing with Sherry's religion, dealing with Sherry's proclivities and so forth. So the story goes, I'm not saying that this is fact, but this is rumored. And Lopez reminded Fox that he's the manager and it's his team. Fox didn't take kindly to that. They had kind of a falling out. It got tough after that. Um, I Fox roomed with Billy Pierce in the during those years.
During that
They were
50,
also
those years, yeah.
yes, they were also aside from Early Wynn, the highest paid members of the White Sox. They were both making about $45,000 a year, which in 1959 was the equivalent of about 600,000 today. Now, let me just say about baseball salaries. Today, the baseball salaries are up there with movie moguls and Silicon Valley CEOs.
Yeah.
In those days, the best players were paid like the top surgeons in the country. $600,000 for baseball for 5.5 months of playing. But they were both extremely highly paid for the time. Fox did not, Pierce did not mind the fact that Fox made 45,000 and he made 40,000 because he said, you know what, he has to play every day, so that's fine with me. He knew nothing about the feud in the dugout after Game 5, in which Larry Sherry, I believe, copped his third win or save in the World Series.
Wow.
But he also reminded Fox that he has a gentleman and a teammate on the team very much like Sherry, namely Barry Latman. And you better shut your mouth and get in the locker room. We got a game the next day, or we're going back to Chicago the next day. Well, there's bad blood between the two of them.
Two of them.
So the story goes. And Lopez, not one to forget. Again, I wish that both gentlemen were around to clarify the story because I admire both of them a great deal.
Well, of course, yeah, one of the
He
greatest
says-
managers.
Yeah.
And the reason, and please, Charles, stop me here. The reason why I brought this up,
Yes.
I've heard so many rumors over the years about other things when it came to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
I had heard that Al Lopez, when Nelly could have got in on his own and not gotten in through the Veterans Committee while he was
Right.
gone, because I just hate this situation. A player dies and then all of a sudden he gets in, like a Ron Santo and that.
Yeah.
But I heard that Mr. Lopez might have been on that committee to stop Fox from getting in.
Yeah.
If that was the rumor or not.
That's the official, unofficial story.
Right.
But then again, the other thing is, and I'm sure I'll alienate some of your listeners with this, but I take the Hall of Fame with a huge grain of salt. I mean, George Kell is in the Hall of Fame. Phil Rizzuto's in the Hall of Fame. Take away Phil Rizzuto's World Series rings. Is he a Hall of Fame player?
No.
Is George Kell a Hall of Fame player? They're in because they played most of their games on the East Coast, and it's an East Coast regional museum. Stan Hack of the Cubs, just to go a little bit far afield, so lifetime batting on base percentage of over 400 and hit 368 in 4 World Series. He's not in the Hall of Fame, but George Kell is in the Hall of Fame. You know, Billy Pierce isn't in the Hall of Fame. And he statistically he's one of the big 4 of the 50s: Spahn, Pierce, Koufax, and Ford. And in many statistics, he surpassed all 4 of them. He's also the only one to be in a World Series in both the American and the National League. He's not in the World Series. It's a regional thing. I mean, it's important and it's a shrine. And I'm not denigrating its significance whatsoever, but you get in based on your East Coast exposure. Everybody knows that.
For sure. And a great insight by you on this tonight, because I'll tell you, even now with this last Hall of Fame thing that I followed, and I interviewed the book authors of the book Chili Dog MVP, Dick Allen finally getting in.
Yes.
Again, could have been very controversial there that Dick got in with things that went on in his life. But again, it just seems this thing, like you said, the East Coast thing, politics, of course, plays this role
Tremendous.
in this game. To kind of close it off, because I want to say something that there was a tribute to you, but to kind of close it off, because we're going to definitely, I want you to come back for a part 2 on those other books, but I have to ask you, this team now, of course, World Series, and I know we went over some of the games here, games 1, games 3, 5, and of course they lose in 6 there. were you surprised that, going into that they won that division? I think Cleveland was chasing them at that time, right?
Cleveland
The
was
race was
chasing them.
between Cleveland and them.
The race, because the Yankees had the worst year they had in many, many seasons. The Yankees were barely 500 at the 4th of July. They were kind of down in the way. Detroit had a terrible time. Detroit changed managers in the middle of the year. The Red Sox in those days were the Red Sox. They couldn't get out of their own way. Cleveland had a tremendous team. Rick Wirtz, Jimmy Pearsall,
Rocky Colavito.
Yeah. And they were, Minnie Minoso was on the Cleveland Indians.
Jimmy Pearsall was on that team, I think, too.
Pearsall and Minoso and others.
Yeah.
And they went with it against Cleveland tooth and nail. The Sox won a huge series against Cleveland over Labor Day, and then they clinched it on September 22nd. And of course, Fire Commissioner Quinn, who'd had a losing streak with his terrible decisions about the Our Lady of Angels fire.
Yeah.
He blows it even further by turning on the air raid sirens, which
the siren. My dad told me about that one. Yeah, my dad told me about that one.
Yeah, that's in the introduction of the book.
Listen, I have to tell you, this book, of course, I want to thank Carl and Tony Ruzicka, whose great book, The Journey of a Lifetime. And when they told me, John, would you like to maybe get a chance, they said, a chance to interview the great author Charles Billington. I says, are you kidding me? I would love to have him on this. This is a fantastic book and a fantastic look back, Charles, at something when life was simple. And I just love the way you started it tonight, because again, we didn't know this about, the team the feud between Comiskey and Vec, the little interviews we talked, the players, the Billy Pierce situation, because you answered a lot of unanswered questions in the book, and you answered a lot of unanswered questions tonight, because you really thrilled me when you told me that Billy Pierce had that thing. I thought, does Lopez not want to play Pierce? Yeah. Here is the book again, Comiskey Park's Last World Series. A History of the 1959 Chicago White Sox, Charles and Billington, the author. Charles, we can still get the book, right?
Absolutely. The book is at the bookstore in Winnetka. It's at the Book Bin in Northbrook. It's at the Lake Forest Bookstore. It's at the Chicago Main Newsstand in Evanston, and also some bookstores in Michigan. And of course, you can go to the McFarland Publishing, which has a wonderful website. You can pull it up there. And as a last resort, if you must, you can always buy it from Amazon as well.
I'd like to, I'm going to have this copy signed by you, because this is just a fantastic read. But I do want to read something about you, which
sure. Okay.
After tonight, it just proved it to me. It was a fantastic thing and a beautiful review. And you proved it here tonight, besides having the book. A fabulous and exciting detail, a terrific job. Mr. Billington is a polished writer, a tireless researcher, and he provides many fascinating facts that you may have forgotten or you never knew. Charles Billington, I truly appreciate you coming on a conversation.
Well, thank you, John.
John Conenna. This was fantastic.
All the best to you. Keep warm, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, and we'll get this out to our audience in a couple days on YouTube and Spotify. Comiskey Park's Last World Series, author Charles Billington. Good night, everyone. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of A Conversation with John Conenna is sponsored by Generate. In today's digital age, staying ahead means harnessing the power of generative AI. Wondering how your small or medium-sized business can join this revolution? Look no further than Generate, your strategic partner for integrating cutting-edge generative AI solutions. We create personalized plans, adapting existing AI technologies to fit your specific business needs. Plus, our expert team provides essential training, empowering you to make the most of these innovative technologies. Interested in transforming your business with AI? Reach out to us at generateteam@gmail.com. That's Generate, GENERAIT, team@gmail.com.
White Sox, White Sox, go, go, White Sox. Let's go, go.